Hi, friends, and thanks for tuning in to part 2 of this mini-series that focuses on Luminaire level lighting controls. My name is John Wilson, and in this video, I'll be sharing findings from a project we dubbed the Lighting Controls Secret Journal. Why'd we call it that? Well, we worked with a bunch of influential and smart and experienced lighting controls specifiers, and we were asking them questions like, why did you specify this? And how come not that? And after you specified this, did anything change along the way? So let me kind of start just by emphasizing this was qualitative research, which targeted a select group of influential specifiers. Rather than really high participation rates for a short survey, this project was all about the deep dive. Our goal was to identify and recruit individuals who were not only experienced in their field, but who could also share a more representative perspective on what's happening in the market. And when I say deep dive, I'm talking about an engagement period that extended over several months and included a survey, interviews, and directly logged project-specific information from more than 60 projects. Now, we all understand the lighting market isn't a monolith, and to give us a sense of the composition we had in terms of participation, the graphs you see here help illustrate exactly just that, right? We had projects of various sizes. We had people from sort of different backgrounds across the spectrum. And you see here, new construction and major renovation, a little bit of everything. So let's talk about the findings. A major theme throughout was client awareness, and more specifically, how client awareness is critical for systems that go beyond code. Now, when we look at client awareness specifically to NLC systems, which I'm going to put up here, well, we can see that clients were generally pretty aware of the benefits for what I'm going to call conventional NLC systems. However, when we start talking about how aware were clients of the value of Luminaire level systems, what you can see here, it was significantly less. Now, next, I'm going to put up here for you, we asked the same participants the question, how often do you get a chance to educate clients on lighting controls before key specifications are made? And you can see here, it was most of the time. So we're summarizing the findings, but it's pretty easy to see what's happening here, right? The key takeaway from this one is that clients tend to be less informed about the benefits of Luminaire level lighting controls, and there's almost always a huge opportunity to educate them along the way. The question is, are we educating them about Luminaire level lighting controls? Another omnipresent theme was value engineering. And this slide looks a little further down the project pipeline and shares how participants estimated value engineering of here NLC systems that were VE'd to incorporate standalone controls. Then we see Luminaire level systems that were VE'd to a lesser form of NLC. And last, this is project participants telling us how often Luminaire level lighting controls that they had specified were VE'd down to standalone controls. Pretty rough. Now, I could spend like a whole hour just talking about this topic and going down this rabbit hole, but we've got a lot to cover here. So to avoid that happening and keep these videos short, I'm just going to share two of my favorite VE related quotes. One guy told me, he goes, VE never gets spec'd out, or excuse me, VE never, Luminaire level lighting controls never get VE, because the only time I ever spec it is if the client is asking for it. It comes kind of back to the client requesting, right? They say it only goes in if someone's asking for it, and if they're asking for it, it doesn't get VE'd. And the other one I really liked was someone shared, sometimes I spec Luminaire level lighting controls thinking at least when it gets VE'd, we'll end up with an NLC system, and it won't go from an NLC system down to standalone controls. I bet some of you have had that experience before. So, two fun quotes. I think it's fair to say Luminaire level lighting controls have a VE problem. They are susceptible to VE more so than some of their other lighting controls cousins. Now, for each one of those 60 plus projects that we logged, we asked participants to tell us the top 3 factors that drove specification. And we got this really awesome long list, and that's kind of what you're looking at here. However, and lucky for us, the real story backed up by nearly every interview that we conducted, can really be summarized in the top 5 lines that we have here, the top 5 responses. So I'm going to zoom in on these and we're going to talk more about them. All right, top 5 responses for what motivated, what really was at the heart of specifying these projects that we looked at. Well, number 1, not really a surprise at all, right? I mean, whereas value is a function of what am I going to get and what it's going to cost me, like no real surprise, that's at the top. And then we have the next one, which is code, right? And code really represents the minimum requirement that applies to everyone. So it's no surprise, right? Like small wonder, code is number 2. Okay, next, I'm going to talk about number 3 and number 5 together. And this is flexibility and ease of use. And the reason I'm talking about these together is because these both represent true benefits that the client is going to receive from the system. And we're going to come back and talk about flexibility and ease of use more, because those were just, it was like a common motif that just kept coming up in interviews. This was the key benefit that people wanted to talk to me about with regards to these systems. And last, we have client request. And client request, of course, is like the unicorn, because if the client's asking for it, well, then that's probably going to be what happens, right? The question there is, how do you get the client to want it? And we talked about that, the need to educate upfront to make them awares. So now that we've put these top 5 responses on the table, let's continue the conversation, but look at things through a slightly different lens. As we talk to people about what drives investment beyond code, the responses very commonly followed a predictable path. First, participants would cite examples related to things like a big tech project that they had, or maybe it was an organization they worked with that was going after a building certification, like a LEED or something like that. And then without even being prompted for follow-up, they would tell me about that one really cool project they worked on. And then they would sort of dial it back and say, that project was really big and it was cool, but that actually represents a really, really small fraction of the overall, projects that they work on, right? So, yes, I think we spend a lot of time talking about the IoT capabilities that are out there, but is that really what's moving the needle? And is that the underlying driver that's saying this is why we want to go with this Luminaire level lighting control system? Well, it's not, right? I mean, in a minority of instances it might be, but it's definitely not the conversation that's happening for the majority of buildings. So we refined the question and we said, like, well then tell us what does matter most, like what matters the most for most projects. And this is when we kept hearing people talk about system flexibility and ease of use. Okay, and before I go to the next slide to talk about these more, I want to just kind of call something out that I've got highlighted over here on, we call this, what is this, the y-axis here, right? So if across the x-axis, it gets more expensive. Well, going up the y-axis, we have standalone controls and then networked controls. And you see I've got individual addressability, then Luminaire level lighting controls, and then all that great IoT life-changing stuff that we can go chase after. So it behooves us to take a second to understand the connection. When people talk about system flexibility and individual addressability at the fixture level and how that manifests and what that really means. All right, for a system to be truly flexible, every Luminaire needs to be individually addressable. And in practical terms, flexibility means the ability to wirelessly rezone and reconfigure spaces with only an app, not getting on a ladder, not having to go rewire stuff, not even having to push buttons, okay? This right here, what I just spelled out, this is what conventional NLC systems can't do. And in the process of sort of trying to articulate this, I came up with these 3 boxes to illustrate what I describe as, the 3 tiers of networked lighting controls. And they're really, we could possibly even say there are more, but I think this is 3's enough, right? So when I would talk to participants and they would tell me how much they valued flexibility, and I would say, well, then how come you didn't specify Luminaire level lighting controls as it's drawn up here all the way on the right? they would commonly say something to the effect of like, well, hey, pal, I don't have to go full Luminaire level lighting controls with the integrated sensor to achieve flexibility. And this middle box is what they were talking about, where every fixture has a load controller, but every fixture does not have a sensor. It's much more agile and flexible than a zone limited system that has one load controller and one sensor to many fixtures. But it's not as fully integrated as a Luminaire level lighting control fixture, which has an integrated sensor and load controller in every fixture. So there's a key difference here. And it's one that, as I talked to a lot of folks, this was a common area where there would be a divergence on, well, what exactly do we mean Luminaire level lighting controls? Now, this isn't the last time we're going to talk about flexibility, but let's hang this up for a second and shift over to the other key benefit, which is ease of use. All right, if flexibility is all about individual addressability, then ease of use is all about how do I make this system do what I want it to do? And we have a lot of different words for this, like programming and configuring and commissioning, etc. So let me set the table by reviewing some of the most common methods and approaches that we see to programming, because this is really what is at the heart of ease of use. Okay. First, we have what I call the push and program method. Okay, it's basically like Morse code. Then we have the remote control method. It's almost as antiquated as a system that like needed a TV guide to go with it. Then you have totally remote systems where all the configuring is being done offsite. You have desktop and web applications, which we're all pretty familiar with, even if it's not specifically through lighting. And then we have app-based applications, which I don't mind wearing my heart on my sleeve saying, I think these are personally the best. And we'll talk a little bit more why as we go forward. But it doesn't stop here when we're talking about methods of system configuration, because nearly every system or a majority of systems also offer pre-configuring. And pre-configuring comes in three general flavors. You have the simple, like prepared variety where, a wall switch and a load controller will just show up prepared. You have what I call this sort of like beautiful mind process, which there's somebody in a room at a computer looking at building plans, and they're putting the sequence of operations into a computer, which is programming that device, and it prints a QR code, and the QR code has a sticker that gets put on the device and put onto the building plans, and it gets shipped in this box, and everything's all there for the room. I love it. I think it's a phenomenal process. It simplifies things, but it's still a lot of work. And then the last pre-configuring method that is worth noting is the remote or web portal based app. And so sometimes you'll hear people describe these as like, yeah, I've already created a digital twin of the building. I've done a whole bunch of the initial setup or initial configuring offsite via my, the app or the desktop web application. And that stuff won't get loaded until I get on site, but you're still doing a significant amount of pre-configuring via these means. So we only have an hour, or not an hour. We got like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes for this video here. So I'm keeping it short. What I want to leave you guys with are a couple things for this, okay? Number one, the vast majority of systems offer the hybrid approach. They will come pre-configured, which will get it most of the way there. It streamlines the initial install, but it still is going to require some modicum of on-site setup. So it's like pre-configuring does not get you out of the system, still needs to be dialed in, right? And in my opinion, I'm just going to tell you guys, I think these are the winners down here on the side. I think across the board in like 5 years, we won't even see the majority of these. I think these are the winners, but reasonable minds can differ. And, if you just disagree, reach out, let me know why. All right, so we talked about ease of use and the different methods. I want to kind of double down on that, and I want to bring flexibility back into it. I talked a few slides back, I said flexibility and ease of use are the two things that matter the most for the most projects. And that's what I'm attempting to drive home with this slide. And even putting a finer point on it, I want to highlight the importance of an app-based tool and flexibility for two specific stages in the product lifecycle. In phase 2 here, this middle box, even for a contractor who is aided by pre-configuration, we all understand the reality of, as built and how things change and the need for a system to be flexible. So what's the best tool for a contractor so they feel confident in the system they are installing? It's access to make changes to that system via the app, not via a remote, not via, I have to learn Morse code to figure out what's going on with this thing. And next, consider the facility operator who inherits the system, okay? And which configuration method is going to empower them to get the most out of the system. Again, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it's the app. And that's based from my experience working with multiple systems and in multiple classes where people are being trained on these systems. For all the amazing value that these systems have the potential to deliver, I can't emphasize enough, if you don't do these first two things well, none of that other stuff really matters. And so I always just really encourage manufacturers that I'm working with and talking to, you can't focus on getting these things right enough. All right, so one of my favorite things to geek out on is comparing all these different approaches within the apps themselves, because just because you have an app doesn't mean it's going to be a great system. We're all familiar with like apps that were marginal or just left something to be desired. So over the past couple of years, this has been something that's really captivated my attention and been fun for me to follow. And I have really taken to documenting the things that, in my opinion, really matter as far as ease of use, affecting ease of use for better or worse. So I'm going to give you a couple examples, okay? When I talk about ease of use, I'm thinking about things like access, okay? So if I can only access your app through iOS, but not Android, that's an issue. That's a barrier for me, right? If I need some sort of special dongle to go into my tablet to talk to the system, that is an access issue, okay? On the other side of the aisle, if the system gives me personal control and layered user authentication, well, that's like a positive, that's a benefit, that's a good access issue. When I'm talking about ease of use, I think about things that streamline the process, okay? So one of those for me is like, does the system require manual action for pairing? Or does the system automatically detect new devices? And even better yet, does it recognize them? Does it say, hey, I know what you are. You're this sort of wall station. Welcome to the party, pal. And then the last one, which is an emerging trend, and we're starting to see more of it, it's what I call multiple ways to win. And this is really key to me because a lot of times apps are developed, these systems get developed in-house and everybody who's the closest to them all sort of has tunnel vision on and they're all super users. And so everything appears just obvious and self-evident, but it's not like that for everybody else in the world who uses it. And this multiple ways to win is really about creating an app experience that is more like choose your own adventure. It's going to give you multiple ways to get the system set up and not limit you to this one way that somebody said, we have to pick one way and this is the most intuitive for everybody. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about when I describe multiple ways to win. In this example, we're going to talk about the scenario here is daylighting with Luminaire level lighting controls. And this is a topic that came up a lot when I was talking to lighting designers and specifiers about Luminaire level lighting controls. And there was kind of this 50-50 mix out there. Some people said, hey, if it's Luminaire level, one of the things I love about it is I know every one of them is going to be doing what it needs to for daylighting. So I don't need to zone for daylight zones. And other people would say, no. I don't want to get callbacks or have the customer confused about why the ceiling is doing, different things and they think there's a problem with the system, even though it's meant to be like that. I'm gonna, all the luminaires along the window, we're gonna zone those, and then the next row over, et cetera, et cetera. So reasonable minds can differ here. Do we zone these or do we not zone these? Well, here is just one example of an app. This happens to be from the Lutron Vive system that we're looking at. There are other great ones out there. This is one example. Their app, right early on, when you are setting it up, it says, hey, we noticed in this space, in this zone, your fixtures have multiple sensors. How do you want these? How do you want these to act? Do you want them to act together, or do you want them to be individual? It is an example. It is a great example of multiple paths to winning the game, right? You don't, it's like, we want people to set up these systems and be happy, and we shouldn't limit them to only one way to do that, because the reality is we're people. There's lots of different ways to get the job done. Okay, moving forward. To provide a conclusion on the specifier journal project, we identified there's a big opportunity and a need to increase client awareness of LLLC benefits. And to refine that, we also identified that flexibility and ease of use are the two benefits which offer clients the most practical benefits to investing beyond code. Now, the rub was that flexibility and ease of use are future benefits, and those still have to compete against the lowest cost, right? So you have that classic dynamic of, you know, the client needs to understand and appreciate the value of those benefits over time, as opposed to what they're shelling out. And that's always, you know, there's always tension there. Nobody's going to be surprised by that. The other rub that came up was more specific to that conversation of, I really want to achieve individual addressability because I want my clients to have that flexibility. But then, you know, some specifiers express a combination of either, you know, LLLC overshoots the mark because I don't need a sensor in every fixture, or I can achieve flexibility without going full LLLC, right? It's really two halves of the same coin. And then the positive trends, I think, that we experienced or heard throughout were really this huge movement with people supporting individual addressability. I feel like 5 years ago, people were really saying, why do I need a load controller in every fixture? And now people were saying, well, of course, I see the benefits of a load controller in every fixture, but why do I need a sensor in every fixture, right? So that was one positive trend. And then the other positive trend is everybody expressed, you know, 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, people felt very limited by the amount of fixtures or luminaires available to them with integrated sensors. And increasingly, we're just seeing more and more available on the market. Now, it's still not, you know, every lighting designer out there had a story of a project where this luminaire didn't work with an integrated sensor, and that was a problem. So I don't want to say, you know, that issue has been completely ameliorated. It's just simply not the barrier it once was, and it's trending in the right direction. All right, folks, that is it for part 2 of the mini-series. If you have questions, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn, reach out to me at the contact information here, and I hope you join us for part 3, when I dive into common sources of confusion. Seriously, part 3 is going to be really fun, so check it out. I hope you do. My name is John Wilson with Fernhill Shopworks, and thank you for watching.